On Friday, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals put down what I think is one of the most ridiculous rulings. It was a decision that came down from the panel of the Ninth Circuit ruling that Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy was illegal. What the court ultimately held was that the president cannot force asylum seekers to remain in Mexico while their cases are being adjudicated in the United States. Now, this is a big deal because just a couple hours after this ruling came down, Border Patrol had to shut down a crossing at in El Paso, border crossing, the bridge, because so many migrants were trying to get across into the United States. They thought that they had their ticket punched, and this was their way into the country. So absolutely disastrous ruling. But before we get to the ruling, before we get to the aftermath, we have to talk about why Donald Trump implemented this Remain in Mexico policy. So when an illegal immigrant arrives at the border today, typically, if they're caught, they're going to apply for asylum. Now, asylum is not the same as refugee admissions. To be an asylum seeker, to be approved for asylum, you have to prove that you're the victim of targeted violence. You have to prove that you're being persecuted in your home country because of who you are. And that if you go back, there's great odds that you'll be hurt or threatened or persecuted even more. The problem is that illegal immigrants know this provision. They are arriving at the border with scripts given to them by by international organizations, non-governmental organizations, NGOs. They're giving them scripts telling them what they have to say to Border Patrol agents to trigger these asylum clauses. They're saying, oh, I'm in fear for my life, I'm fleeing violence. Almost all of these claims are bogus. But they know that the United States does not have the funding in place to detain all of them. Now, last year when Congress was going through its appropriations process, Democrats in the House of Representatives went out of their way to make sure that Border Patrol and ICE, through DHS funding, did not have enough resources to detain all of the illegal immigrants that they apprehend. This was deliberate. Democrats deliberately reduced the funding to make sure that there was not enough bed space for all detained illegal immigrants. Now, what that means is that ICE and Border Patrol have to prioritize who they're going to detain. They have to pick and choose. And many of the people that they detain, actually the majority of the people that they detain under this policy would have to be released into the country with a notice to appear. Basically, this is a court date telling the illegal immigrant, okay, we've caught you, you've broken the law, you've applied for asylum, here's your date to appear before a judge to plead your case. Now, what we know from the data in the past is that the vast majority, almost all of the illegal immigrants who received notices to appear never showed up to their court. The fraudulent, the people who were actually ordered removed from the country for having fraudulent claims, over 90% of them didn't actually show up to their hearings. They used this just as a way to get into the country. And once they're released, they disappeared, never to be seen from again until they turn up on some police blotter or something. When Trump came into office, he wanted to stop this. So he was trying to figure out ways, he and his administration were trying to figure out ways to put an end to catch and release. And what they ultimately came up to was what they called Remain in Mexico. Now, the premise is that if you're going to apply for asylum in the United States, then instead of being released into the interior, instead of being detained in a Border Patrol or ICE detention facility, instead of all that, you would simply stay in Mexico. Or better yet, you'd stay in the country, in your country of origin, where you could have your claim adjudicated while you're there. So the point is that instead of being released, they remain in Mexico. And once their cases are adjudicated, if they are proven to be legitimate, bona fide asylum seekers, then yeah, they would come in. But as is the case which we saw from this program, when almost all of them proved to be fraudulent, instead of then having to race around the country to figure out where they disappeared to, they simply go back home or stay in Mexico or whatever. At that point, it's not our problem. They would have filed a fraudulent claim, and best of luck to you. Go find another country. That was the Remain in Mexico policy. Now, what that did was it ensured that the frauds were not allowed into the country, but also it respected the rights of legitimate asylum seekers so that they weren't competing with the frauds. This freed up Border Patrol and ICE's resources so they didn't have to be detaining as many people, didn't have to be putting the kids in the cages, as Democrats claimed over the past year or two. It freed up a ton of resources. And the places that they were staying in Mexico, yeah, they weren't five-star hotels, But considering that these people were claiming to be fleeing for their lives, their accommodations in Mexico were a hell of a lot better than what they claimed to be fleeing. So the Remain in Mexico policy worked. We saw that through the first couple of months, barely any of the applications actually ended up being legitimate. Almost all of them were turned away and sent back home. What this ruling from the Ninth Circuit does is it essentially says that this program, the Remain in Mexico program, is illegal, that the president is not allowed to do that. Anytime someone comes to a border checkpoint and says, I'm seeking asylum, Ninth Circuit says we have to let them in. Now, the Trump administration warned, if you do this, we will see a surge at the border. We will see everyone who's been remaining in Mexico trying to get back in. And that ruling came down on Friday. By Friday night, that's exactly what we saw. We saw well over 100, some people are saying hundreds, of migrants trying to storm the U.S.-Mexico border crossing in El Paso. There's a bridge. Trying to storm the bridge and force their way into the United States. The majority of these people were allegedly from Cuba. Now, they've been waiting there for months to have their claims heard, 10 months, some of them, to have their claims heard, and they didn't want to wait anymore. They wanted to force their way into the country. Now, for a Cuban migrant, the chances of your asylum claim being accepted are pretty high, right? It's well documented that the Cuban government is oppressing its people, it's persecuting its people. So to be a Cuban migrant, unless there's something funny going on with the application process, the majority of them will have their applications accepted. But what we saw on Friday was that the minute this ruling came down, it started circulating through the migrant shelters and the migrant camps, and these people decided to storm the border. Try to, at least. The Trump administration responded quickly, and they actually shut down the entire border crossing. Not just for pedestrians, they shut the whole bridge down to stop these migrants from rushing the checkpoint and trying to force their way into the country. Now, the fact that the administration had to go to these lengths is pretty shameful, right? The Ninth Circuit ultimately agreed to put a stay on their ruling. They agreed to stay the ruling pending another appeal. Temporary stay. But the migrants in Mexico don't understand those technicalities, don't understand that. People are still trying to rush the border thinking that they've all of a sudden, they've gotten their ticket into the country. So we saw these activist judges overturn a lower Ninth Circuit ruling, a district court ruling that actually upheld the policy, overturn it, and within hours we had another surge at the border. This is shameful. We know how to fix this problem. We know what the problems are. The problems are that our asylum system is broken. It is far too easy for someone to get into the country with a fraudulent asylum claim. By the time we figure out that they are lying, that they are cheating the system, they've already disappeared at that point. We know how to fix this. So the bill that's been in Congress, and it's actually been collecting dust for 6 months now, is the Secure and Protect Act. Now, it's written by Lindsey Graham, and what that bill would do is 4 things. It would get rid of the loopholes that illegal immigrants and smugglers use to force their way into the country. Now, among those is the idea that if you have a child with you, you're automatically let in. Now, what we've seen in Mexico and in Central America is that smugglers are actually abducting children, and in some cases even purchasing them just to get into the United States because they think having a child in tow is their ticket in. So the Secure and Protect Act gets rid of that provision. It ensures that having a child with you is not an automatic get-out-of-jail-free card. It also gives the Trump administration, the government, the power to detain illegal immigrants seeking asylum until their asylum claims can be heard. So Remain in Mexico wouldn't be necessary anymore. I think that's preferable policy. But if that ends up being overturned, then the Secure and Protect Act would allow Border Patrol and ICE to continue to hold these people until a judge can actually hear their case. Extremely important. The third thing that this bill would do is it would raise the definition of what qualifies as for asylum. So right now, in order to get asylum, someone just has to claim that they're being persecuted. What this bill would do is it would raise the stakes. It would require more evidence, and it would raise the standard of persecution so that it's not just like possible. At this point, they would need to prove that it's more likely than not that they would be persecuted if they were returned home. And then lastly, fourth, what this bill would do is it would hire at least 500 new immigration judges to work through these cases, make sure that they are heard quickly, and to work through the backlog, because there's hundreds of thousands of immigration cases that the government simply doesn't have time, doesn't have the manpower to go through. So those four things together would solve this crisis, solve the problem at the border, solve these migration surges. And Congress knows that that's what it takes. This is Lindsey Graham's bill. He is not a far-right conservative. He is pretty much down the road. Before Trump was elected, when Lindsey Graham promoted an immigration bill, Democrats agreed with it. He is not an immigration hawk by any definition. He put this bill forward, and Democrats actually tried to sabotage it when Lindsey Graham put it forward in committee. Democrats didn't even bother to show up. They tried to deny Lindsey Graham, who was the chairman of the committee, they tried to deny him the quorum necessary to advance the bill out. They just didn't show up. So Democrats hate this bill because, A, they have no problem with people being let into the country without any restrictions. They have no problem with that. They want to import more voters into the United States. But more importantly, they want to get something for it. If this is the way the United States is going to go, if we're going to have these protections, Democrats want there to be a trade. So obviously, we look at what's going on with coronavirus around the world. The idea that someone can simply walk up to a border checkpoint, say, I'm seeking asylum, and then just get released into the country, it's insane, right? In a world where pandemics and illnesses threaten to wipe us all out, if you believe the propaganda, if you believe the hype, threaten to wipe the human race out. In a world where Democrats are complaining that Donald Trump is not taking the threat seriously, the idea that anyone who shows up to the border should just be let right in, it is insane, right? But Democrats, if we're going to go this road, they don't want to give up these asylum rules for nothing. They want to get something in return. They are literally playing politics with our national security. They are playing politics with our community safety, right? Because when people get into the country unvetted, we have no idea who people are. And yeah, I understand the argument that not all illegal immigrants commit crimes, but any illegal immigrant who commits a crime, that's someone who should never have been here in the first place. So you don't get to make the argument, Democrats, that, oh, well, it's not all illegal immigrants. It doesn't matter. None of them should technically be in the country. So any crime committed by any of them, it's horrible and it's preventable, right? This bill would prevent it. The Democrats want to get something in return. They want to get amnesty. That's what they've always, when you hear the words comprehensive immigration reform, what they're talking about is trading border security for amnesty. They're talking about cracking down on things like asylum, fraud, securing the border with barriers, walls, fences, and cutting back on other types of fraud. And in exchange, legalizing the people who are already here, right? That's what Democrats want. Because over the years, every time they've presented that, they've got the amnesty, but they've never actually gotten the border security. They tricked Ronald Reagan into making this agreement. Ronald Reagan agreed to amnesty for millions of illegal immigrants. The wall never went up. George W. Bush got tricked too. He agreed to basically loosen up immigration enforcement in exchange for a border fence. Now he loosened up the immigration enforcement, but Congress never funded the Secure Fence Act of 2006. They passed it, but they never funded it, so the wall never went up. Now Democrats are hoping they can do it again. They're hoping that they can convince Republicans now to agree to this compromise and give amnesty to everyone who's already here illegally in exchange for border security. But we know that when the amnesty comes, the border security will never happen. It'll be defunded. It'll be blocked. Some activist judge somewhere, like what we see in the Ninth Circuit, will rule that it's unconstitutional or illegal, and we'll be left with just the amnesty. So that's why, part of the reason why Democrats are so against this, because they realize that they have leverage. And it's really sick to think of it that way. It's sick to think of it as people are storming into the country unvetted. We have no idea who they are. We don't know if they're carrying diseases. We don't know if they're members of gangs or cartel. We don't know anything about them. So this idea that they are treating our national security as leverage for a domestic policy proposal that in large they want to be able to grow their base of support, it's pretty shameful. It's pretty shameful. So the fact that the Secure Fence Act, Secure and Protect Act has not passed yet, there's really no excuse for it. We know the problem. We know how to fix it. And now it's time for Congress to do it. So we here at Conservative Daily are really trying to make this push to get this bill across the finish line. Because in any other presidency, if it wasn't Donald Trump, right, if it wasn't the resistance versus Trump, this bill would already be law. If it wasn't resist Trump at all costs, deny him any win, keep the border open as long as possible, this would be law, right? So what we're calling on all conservatives to reach out to their members of Congress, their senators, and push for this bill. Let them know that you see what they're doing, you see their inaction, and that it's unacceptable. And that if they cannot bring themselves to pass this common sense bill that protects the rights of bona fide asylum seekers while cracking down on fraud, if they cannot see to passing this bill and putting it on Trump's desk, then they have to go. It's plain and simple. They have to go. So we're going to keep covering this, and as more developments come out, we'll make sure to post some updates. As I said, the Ninth Circuit issued this ruling, and then the Trump administration basically said to them, hey, if this goes through, it's going to be catastrophic. We're going to see huge surges at the border. That happened, and the court ultimately issued a temporary stay. So this is going to change a lot in the next coming weeks and months. So as it does, we're going to keep you updated, because it's too important to put on page 6, right? It's too important to devote 30 seconds on the nightly news and then forget about it. This is a problem. And if Trump hadn't enacted the Remain in Mexico program and the other fixes that he's been able to accomplish, we'd still be seeing caravans, right? We'd still be seeing thousands, tens of thousands of people trying to force their way into the country. And as I said, in a world where we're fighting the coronavirus, we're worried about pandemics, it makes 0 sense to have this policy in place. It makes 0 sense to do catch and release at the border. Absolutely no sense. So yeah, again, we're going to keep you guys in the loop. We're going to keep focusing on this as more information becomes available. So keep an eye out for more videos in the future.